One of the things I would worry about when deploying the military is that redneckism is likely to be higher in the military than in the police forces, which poses an additional risk to people. Well, you can use whatever words you want to define what would happen. Let's say there's 3% or 8% of people in the military that would find themselves compromised, sent there because they identify with the limited view of very complex social systems, um, and the science behind it all, which goes back again to the capacity of Canadian hospitals, which nobody's talking about in 2 years, as really the main cause of all this. It's a social pandemic. The science is there to say it's not a viral pandemic. It's just that our house of cards societies, which aren't better in Canada, medically rated, compared to many other countries, is what we should have been talking about. And I'm not going to go support people that claim they're, fighting for my freedom when they don't understand very much about how everything is interconnected, and they define freedom very differently than I do, and won't even provide a definition of freedom if that's the only conversation I want to insist on being in with them. Because if they did, I would have to bring up the fact that their definition compromises the ability of freedom of others. So it's about collaboration. We heard recently in the sciences, and by the way, MPs of the Conservative Party should not say the oxymoron political science or economic science and then just say science. It's like, dude, you don't even use the word science. You're just making yourself look very ridiculous. So, if you don't know how to define science and what it is specifically you're using, which is, again, a very complex paradigm. It's more complex than your magical monetary paradigms and more complex than the simpleton, developmentally disabled supernatural religious paradigms. It's a complex thing. And we do not, as a species, understand most of what people talk about when they claim to be talking about their own sciences of specialty. So don't do that. It's upsetting. It's upsetting that you may have had a good point, Mr. Conservative Party member, and then you embarrass yourself. Of course, you don't embarrass yourself with rednecks, the votes you're going for. Everybody's going for this monetary paradigm thing. The police, the RCMP, the educators, the medical staff. Everybody's using this social pandemic, which proves it's a social pandemic, to try to get more money funding going their way. It's what keeps getting you in trouble in the first place. You're so developmentally retarded as a species, and Canadians have such toxic patterns to their cultures here that you are not more developmentally disabled or developmentally, what you guys call developed country, which means, more like roads and banks and bridges and buildings and, 911 and things like that, right? It's not related to actually working together. So I'm coming back to finding our ancestors who colonized from the African continent to the European and had similar parallel hominids to us over there. And we didn't win, guys, because we used language or collaboration efficiently, which you can still see today we don't, is we actually won over them because we're cruel bastards that can't be trusted. Because we use violence, and we pretend we don't, and we pretend it's our last resort when it's usually our first resort. Except that we've now made language violent and inefficient and have, ulterior motives to it. We can't even do that. And we have blended our genes with those ancestors that were on a parallel course than what you like to call Homo sapiens, but that I call Homo communia. So again, until you look at yourselves in the mirror as a species. Now, very soon I might go visit Ottawa and go, ask a few questions. But if anybody asks my opinion of things, it's going to be, dude, my opinion is so different than the norm, I do not recommend you persist in asking me what my opinion is. I'm just curious about where you stand on this or this. And don't give me too much outside of what I'm specifically curious about. And I might be asking how this is good for your kids over there, for example. Those horns, if you want to follow the science and what they're breathing, like fumes from diesel engines, if you believe you're following science by putting your kids in this, and the language and the behaviors, if your kids are laughing and you think it's okay for them to be poisoned by gases there, and also by behaviors that don't make sense or add up, then you are an idiot, because they can laugh and smile somewhere else that isn't supporting redneckism and intellectual laziness. So do not get in that conversation with me if I happen to go to Ottawa soon. You want to just answer and say, and what about you? What do you... And I'm going to say, pick one subject. Ask me to define it, and I'll give you an example with the ecocentric man from Earth, the definition I apply it. And I'm a culture repair, and I'm able to reference the outside world. That means you. That means my decisions aren't egocentric. They're not made to bring more money my way or to make me feel good that I've done something with my life as society is crashing. And when it's all built on, fake information or just very shallow definitions of words that are thrown here and there that nobody can define, that everybody's inconsistent about if you observe their behaviors objectively, if you study them as a land mammal.